3 days before Christmas, I thought my phone was buzzing with last-minute plans, maybe my brother asking about carpooling or my mom checking if I could bring napkins. Instead, it was the call that ended my place at the family table. My brother's voice came light, too casual, the way he always sounded when about to say something cruel, and wanted me to thank him for phrasing it sweetly. He asked if I remembered Sienna, the new girlfriend. She was sensitive, very into energy, and my work, well, it was heavy. He didn't say I was a doctor working with elderly patients preserving dignity where others gave up. He just said heavy, like I was a rain cloud that might ruin the sparkle of his party. For her sake, he told me maybe I should sit this one out. I remember murmuring, "Okay," my ears ringing. An hour later, my mom called. She always followed the choreography perfected over years. Her tone was gentle, as if she wasn't about to lob a grenade into my chest. She told me if I came, it could cause confusion. She even said if I showed up, they might not answer the door just to keep things comfortable. Comfort, it seemed, only meant protecting those who didn't want me there. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I said okay and hung up. Then I did what I should have done long ago. I opened my banking app. Mortgage payment canceled. Car loan top-up frozen. Home maintenance fund paused. Every leak I'd patched, every car battery I'd replaced, every invisible way I had been useful I erased. Because being silently useful means no one notices until the silence costs them something. And I was done being useful. That Christmas Eve, my apartment was dark. I packed away the gifts I had bought, yes, even one for my brother who mocked gift cards as soulless, before handing me one 3 years straight and turned off the tree lights. I went to bed early alone. I thought that would be the worst part. But the real turn came the next morning. My mom called then again, then sent a text, "Can you answer? You've done enough damage already." My stomach sank. Moments later, my Aunt Sharon, the only relative who still mailed me birthday cards, called. Her voice was low, careful. She asked what happened yesterday. "They're saying you ruined Christmas," she whispered, "but you weren't even there. Ruined it. Me." I blinked at my cold toast while she explained in fragments. Something had gone wrong with Sienna. She left early upset, and somehow my name came up. I wasn't sure what that meant, but my chest tightened with something close to hope. What had she seen? What had she heard, and why for once was the story slipping out of their control? It made me think of childhood, of Dorian, my younger brother, the miracle baby, born after years of trying. He was golden gifted, the boy who could do no wrong. When he drew on the walls, it was expressive. When I broke a dish setting the table, I was careless. When he got a participation ribbon, it went on the fridge. My perfect report cards disappeared into drawers. I once left one on the kitchen table hoping they'd ask. They didn't. They told people Dorian was artsy, sensitive with an eye for color. Meanwhile, I was too serious, too quiet, too heavy. My sketchbook once ended up in the recycling bin under grocery ads. They said they thought it was scrap paper. Years later, I entered medical school on the first try. My mom's response, "That's intense, don't burn out." Meanwhile, when Dorian switched majors 3 times, then dropped out to pursue creative direction, they threw him a re-entering life party with balloons. They turned my old bedroom into his studio. I wasn't invited to the celebration. There's a photo in their hallway of Dorian holding a paintbrush at 23, smiling like he cured cancer. That same week, I published a paper in a medical journal about early memory loss intervention. No one mentioned it. They called me too serious, always working, but they never asked what I was working on. So when Christmas came and Sienna arrived glowing like the second coming of Snow White, I wasn't shocked they tried to protect the illusion. I wasn't surprised they called me heavy, difficult, better unseen. What surprised me was what happened next. Because when Sienna saw my photo, something shifted. Aunt Sharon filled the silence with cautious pieces saying the room had been easy laughter and wine, until someone passed around an old family album. My picture came up, white coat and tired smile, and the energy changed in a way even the oblivious could feel. Sienna went still, set her glass down, and asked one question that pulled the thread out of the sweater. "Is this the sister you told me about?" No one offered details. She said just a jumble of defensiveness and jokes that sounded mean once the air cooled, and then Sienna took her coat and left. The story stopped there for my aunt, but it started something in me, a quiet, steady current running beneath the ache, the sense that for once the narrative had slipped their hands. I spent the next 2 days on autopilot working, walking, heating soup, pretending the ache was just weather passing through. Then a voicemail arrived from a number I didn't know, and I pressed play with the kind of caution that belongs to people who learn the hard way that messages rarely bring good news. It was Sienna. She said she got my number from Aunt Sharon and hoped that was all right. She said she recognized my face because I had treated her grandmother Elma years ago, that the old woman still told the story about the doctor who looked her in the eye and said, "You're not done yet." Her voice grew smaller as she apologized for what was said about me, for not knowing, for being part of a party that asked me to be invisible before I even crossed the threshold. She said she left because she could not pretend kindness where there was none, and then she thanked me for saving the only person who ever made her feel rooted. I listened again and again until the tea went cold in my hands and the room blurred. I cried, not because I wanted an apology, but because someone had seen me without the script, first had placed a warm name on the work I carried like a second spine. The relief was so sudden, it felt like standing up after years of kneeling. Of course, the relief couldn't last unchallenged. My mother called before noon the next day and skipped hello, her words hitting the ground running. She didn't ask how I was. She asked what I had said to Sienna. She said my brother hadn't slept, that he'd been blocked, that a post was circulating in certain New York circles in which Sienna described walking into a house decorated with polite lights and sharper tongues, and remembering the feel of real kindness when she saw my photograph. She hadn't named me, but she hadn't needed to. The subtext was simple enough. Some families worship image and call it love. My mother called the post slander and asked me to fix it, to reach out to convince Sienna to delete it, to restore Dorian's reputation, before it stained as if I were the family's public relations department, and not the woman they had gently barred from Christmas to keep the vibe intact. I told her I'd think about it and hung up, then found the post myself. It wasn't cruel. It was careful and true, written by someone who understood the difference between gentleness and cowardice. She wrote about how people can hide cruelty behind table runners and laughter, how they can rewrite a woman into a problem because it is easier than asking why she stands apart. She wrote that when she saw my picture, she remembered what it feels like to be treated as a person, and realized she had been taught to admire the wrong things. Comments multiplied beneath it, strangers speaking gratitude for a story that didn't need to be loud to be devastating. And for the first time in years, the chorus around my name didn't sound like a verdict. By nightfall, my father had texted one sentence: "You need to fix this," and I let it sit there until the words lost their urgency and revealed the entitlement underneath. The next morning, Dorian called. His voice was hoarse, for once stripped of the lacquer he wore like a second skin. He said he hadn't known I treated Sienna's grandmother, that I could have told him, that I could have done 100 invisible tasks to shield him from the truth. When I reminded him he'd asked me not to come, he said he was protecting the vibe. I repeated the word back to him like a specimen under glass, and he fell quiet, then admitted Sienna had ended things because the way they spoke about me made her sick. He said people were calling him toxic. The old instinct to rescue twitched, then stilled. I told him the truth had helped itself for once. He asked if I would help. I said nothing, and the silence did the work. He hung up, and the world did not end. Aunt Sharon called again to say Sienna had asked for my mailing address, and I hesitated before giving it, feeling the faintest lift in my chest that comes when a door opens you didn't know you'd been walking toward. 3 days later, a letter arrived, handwritten on thick paper. She told me Elma still did yoga and walked to the market, and told anyone who asked that a young doctor once told her she wasn't done and made it true. She thanked me for the exact type of kindness that never makes photographs, and said she had left because some rooms make honesty impossible. I framed that letter and set it by my desk, not as a trophy, but as a counterweight to years of unseeing. It changed nothing about who I was and everything about how I carried it. Predictably, the family regrouped in a way that felt like a committee assembling minutes after a scandal. An email landed with the subject line, "Let's reset things," signed by my parents and my brother, their names lined up like the jury forepersons they imagined themselves to be. They did not apologize. They regretted the way things may have been perceived, asked for a brunch on neutral ground, and tucked a condition in the third paragraph where they hoped my eye would slip. Would I please convince Sienna to delete her post? The reset was an exchange, then not a reckoning. When I didn't answer, they escalated with a group text to cousins and a phone call from my father to a hospital administrator he'd met once at a fundraiser, whispering that I might be emotionally unstable. The administrator called me at once apologetic and appalled, and any remaining bridge burned itself in the wind. They were closing ranks while I opened windows. I spent the following days working, writing charts, walking the city at dusk without checking my phone for the next emergency I was supposed to absorb. Silence stopped feeling like exile and became a habitat I was learning to furnish. The urge to make sense of them softened into a smaller, truer aim to make sense of myself. When the knock came on a Sunday, and I looked through the peephole to see the three of them standing in a united knot, I knew the performance was going to try one last time to reassert its script. I opened the door anyway, not to be swayed, but to let the words land where I could watch them without flinching. They came in like it was an intervention, my father stiff in his coat, my mother wearing her crisis face, and Dorian hovering like a child who'd been caught with paint on his hands. They sat on my couch as though it belonged to them, and my father began with the oldest weapon they had, debt disguised as sacrifice. "We raised you. We paid for everything. Paid for. You're only where you are because of us." It was an argument rehearsed so many times it had grooves. My mother followed with tears balanced at the rim of her voice, saying they'd made mistakes, but I had punished them enough. And then Dorian, ever the chosen one, looked straight at me and said, "You're the only one who can fix this. She'll listen to you." The absurdity almost made me laugh. They had built a narrative where I was simultaneously too heavy to be present, but light enough to be carried when it suited them. Instead of answering, I walked to my desk and pulled open a drawer. Inside were printouts and statements, every payment I had ever made for them, every bill I had covered, every loan left to rot. Mortgage support, car repairs, even the emergency dental surgery no one thanked me for. I spread them across the table like evidence in court. You want to talk about who owes what I said? Because I can calculate interest if you'd like. My father flushed red, insisting that wasn't the point. Of course not. The point was always that when I gave it was expected, and when I withheld it was cruelty. My mother whispered that we were family. I reminded her that family was the very thing they denied me entry to, the door they promised not to open for the sake of comfort. They mocked me, lied about me, excluded me, and only now that their golden boy's image was tarnished, they needed me visible again. Dorian tried one more time, leaning forward with that stubborn tilt of his jaw. "She's still in love with me," he said. "That's why she did this. Not because of you." The arrogance was breathtaking, the delusion almost artful. I tilted my head, met his eyes, and told him the truth. "She dumped you because she saw what you allowed. Because you let a room full of people mock the woman who saved her grandmother's life. That's why." The silence afterward was deep, the kind that reveals every shallow thing said before it. My mother looked down, my father's jaw tightened, and Dorian sank back into his seat like a balloon losing air. I said I wasn't asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not repayment, not silence, but I wasn't offering anything anymore either. They had made me a ghost until they needed a scapegoat, and I refused to wear the sheet. They left without another word. I closed the door softly, not slamming it, not triumphant, just steady. That was 2 months ago. Since then, the fallout came in whispers through Aunt Sharon, who still called now and then with updates she seemed half apologetic to deliver. Dorian moved in with a friend after freelance work dried up and doors closed on his reputation. My parents put the house up for sale when they could no longer manage the mortgage, trading the space that once held so many curated illusions for a smaller rental with fewer rooms to decorate. I hadn't lifted a finger to make that happen. They did it to themselves, building their lives on favoritism and facade until the walls collapsed. And then, on an ordinary afternoon in my office, I found a small package on my desk. No note, just a box of chocolates and a sticky note with a doodle of a sun. I knew who it was from, and for once I didn't brace for obligation. I let myself feel it. Not revenge, not victory, just peace. The kind that comes when you stop carrying debts that were never yours to begin with. For the first time in years, I realized I had nothing left to prove. Not to them, not to anyone. Peace is a strange thing when you've been raised on chaos. At first it feels empty, like you forgot to do something important, like a silence waiting to be filled with another demand. But over time it softened into relief. Days stretched without guilt-laced phone calls, without the endless tug-of-war of being asked to sacrifice, and then scolded for taking up space. I woke up to my own life, and for the first time it was quiet in a way that didn't feel like exile. Of course they didn't leave me alone forever. Families like mine never do. First came the email subject line, "Let's reset things." It was signed by all three of them, like a group project turned in late. The words were polished but empty, full of misunderstandings and regrettable perceptions, but never the one thing that mattered: I'm sorry. Buried in the third paragraph was the real request: would I please convince Sienna to delete her post? A reset apparently was only possible if their reputations were restored. I closed the email without answering. When silence didn't work, they escalated. My father tried calling a hospital administrator he once met at a fundraiser, whispering suggestions that I might be unstable. The administrator phoned me directly, horrified, apologizing before I even asked. That bridge burned itself to ash without my help. Then came the family group text, a curated version of events sent to cousins who barely knew me. The narrative painted me as cruel, unstable, tearing the family apart. 2 cousins reached out with pity texts, one even offering a voucher for a yoga retreat just in case I was going through something. The absurdity would have been funny if it hadn't been so familiar. Gaslighting disguised as care, and when words failed, they showed up in person. One Sunday afternoon, I opened the door to find them all there, my parents and Dorian standing on my porch like a tribunal. I let them in not out of hope, but to witness how far they would go. They sat down and began again, same script, new spin. My father spoke of sacrifice of the money they spent raising me. My mother wept about mistakes and forgiveness. Dorian insisted I was the only one who could fix things, that Sienna would listen to me. I spread the financial records across the table, every bill I had paid, every loan I had covered, every silent act of support they never acknowledged. "You want to talk about debts," I said. "Here they are." My father went red, saying it wasn't about that. My mother whispered we were family. I reminded her they had barred me from their Christmas table, had promised not to open the door. And Dorian, desperate, claimed Sienna was still in love with him, that this was about him all along. I almost laughed. I told him the truth: she left because he let them ridicule me, because she saw what he refused to see, that cruelty disguised as tradition is still cruelty. They left in silence, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The world didn't end when I refused to fix it. Nothing collapsed except the illusions they had built. Aunt Sharon told me later that Dorian had moved in with a friend, that my parents sold the house and downsized. Their collapse was theirs alone. I didn't cause it. I just stepped out of the scaffolding they expected me to hold up forever. A few weeks later, another letter arrived, this one from Sienna. She wrote about her grandmother, still walking to the market, still telling the story of the doctor who looked her in the eye and said she wasn't done yet. She thanked me again, not just for saving her grandmother, but for showing her what strength looked like. I framed the letter beside my desk, where I wrote end-of-day notes. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder that kindness doesn't need applause to matter. For the first time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone proof of my worth. It has been a year since that Christmas I was told not to come, a year since my mother said they would pretend not to know me, and my brother claimed my absence would protect the vibe. In that time, I've blocked numbers, muted emails, and stepped fully out of the role they wrote for me. Not out of rage, but out of peace. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is enforce a silence no one else can interrupt. They still tried for a while. More letters, more stories whispered into the ears of distant cousins, more attempts to paint me as cold, unwell, ungrateful. But the accusations slid off me like water, because for the first time I understood love without respect is just control in disguise. Their words no longer stuck because I stopped standing in the place where they could throw them. In their absence, my life filled with something real. I learned that peace is a habit, not just a moment. I worked, I rested, I laughed with colleagues who knew me as more than a shadow of someone else's narrative. I cooked for myself and wore the forest green sweater I'd bought for that Christmas party alone, not as a symbol of exclusion, but as proof I belonged anywhere I chose to stand. Sometimes I thought of Sienna, of her quiet letter, and her choice to walk away when the truth revealed itself. She hadn't tried to fix me or ask for more. She simply saw me, and that recognition was enough to stitch something in me that had been torn for years. It reminded me that one voice of truth, even whispered, can undo decades of lies told loudly. When I look back now, I see it clearly. I didn't ruin Christmas by staying home. I didn't ruin my brother's future by refusing to run interference. I didn't ruin the family by speaking nothing at all. What ruined them was their own reflection finally held up where they couldn't avoid it. All I did was step aside so the mirror could show what had always been there. I don't know if they will ever apologize, but I know I no longer need them to. Because healing didn't come from their words, it came from my choice. I chose to stop being useful at the expense of being seen. I chose to stop being the ghost they called on, only when convenient. I chose to build a life where my worth is measured in dignity, not debt. So, when people ask me now what family means, I tell them, this family is not who demands your silence. It is not who measures your value by what you provide. Family, real family, are the ones who knock gently, who see you as you are, who don't ask you to shrink so they can glow brighter. Sometimes those people share your blood. Sometimes they don't. But the lesson is the same. You get to choose who has a seat at your table. And this year, when I set the table for dinner, I lit the candles for myself, poured the wine, and whispered the only word that mattered: freedom. If this story touched, you don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts. Your voice helps bring more stories like this to life. End.